Hey, and welcome to the TMS practical. Yes, today we're going to talk you through using transcranial magnetic stimulation on a participant. I'm going to show you a little bit of what that looks like and what it would be like to actually do a TMS experiment yourself. There are lots of different types of TMS experiments, lots of different types of stimulation that you can do, and I'm just going to mostly talk you through a single pulse TMS experiment, or what it would be like to place a TMS machine over the primary motor cortex and evoke a muscle twitch in the contralateral side. Okay, this is our TMS machine. It's capable of single pulse and of repetitive pulse as well. It is not, however, capable of the paired pulse technique, so it only has one coil. Oops. It's although it looks complicated, again, a pretty straightforward machine. In the bottom section of the machine, down here, you have a large set of capacitors. Capacitors, in effect, are just batteries. They're able to hold and store a charge and then release it in a very brief instance, able to release that charge very, very quickly. And the charge, of course, is released through this heavily insulated coil of wires into this figure of 8 coil over here, right? And that's the energy is released in under a millisecond through this figure of 8 coil. And in doing so, of course, hopefully I've already talked you through some of the theory, but in doing so, the electrical charge through this insulated coil of wires will produce a magnetic field that also will be present for just an instant. That magnetic field passes through the scalp unimpeded and reaches the neurons inside the brain, where it will induce a charge and interfere or stimulate the neurons in the underlying part of the cortex. You'll notice that the coil is flat on one side and curved on the other. It is the flat side of the coil that will make contact with the scalp. Typically, the localization of the magnetic field is roughly the meeting point of the coil of wires, so approximately about there. That's typically the area that you want to make contact with the surface of the scalp, so the magnetic field is as close as possible to brain tissue. All right. So obviously, your participant would come into the lab. They would undergo a safety procedure. So just like all brain stimulation, you would make sure they're not epileptic, they don't have a pacemaker, and they meet other criteria that enable them to take part in a brain stimulation study. As long as they're safe and they're happy to continue, you would sit them down, and depending on the type of experiment you were doing, you usually stimulate while they're engaging in a task. But there are other tasks where you might stimulate what's called offline and then ask them to engage in a task. But in this experiment, I'm quite simply going to ask my participant to passively sit in their seat, and I'm going to try and stimulate the primary motor cortex in order to induce a muscle-evoked potential on their contralateral hand. So if I wanted to induce a muscle twitch in their left hand, I'm going to try and find their primary motor cortex on the right side of their brain. All right? I would place so the motor cortex is perhaps the most studied part of the brain when it comes to doing TMS. And there are some very well-established protocols. We know roughly that the motor cortex, the primary motor cortex, is down the central part of the brain. So we're looking for the midline approximately, and we place the TMS with the handle pointing backwards and the contact point perpendicular to the scalp. Once we're in that position, in effect, we move around, stimulating, emitting one single pulse at a time until we see a clear muscle twitch in the left arm. The TMS is equipped with a number of safety protocols and a number of ways of using it. One, you actually send a current down the coil of wires using a foot pedal. So I just taken the foot pedal up now to show it to you, but this is placed on the floor here. And to stimulate, you simply press on the foot pedal in order to release a current through the insulated coil of wires through the figure of 8 and induce a magnetic field or create a magnetic field. There is also a further safety mechanism on pretty much every TMS stimulator I've ever seen, and that is this, these two buttons on the side of the TMS coil. In order for a current to fire through here, both of these buttons have to be pressed at the same time. That means you can't accidentally step on the pedal and induce a current. To actually fire the TMS machine, we have to tell it what we want. I've quite simply set it up to induce a single pulse. I can then decide the intensity of the stimulation that I want to give it off. I'm going to set it quite low now because I don't actually want to break all the cameras and equipment here. Charge up the machine. It will tell me it's ready to go. I will place the TMS coil over the head, hold the two buttons down, and then press on the foot pedal to release the current through the coil of wires and create a magnetic field. When doing a single pulse, in order to induce a twitch in the contralateral side, you pretty much don't find it straight away, but rather you place the coil over the head and move around until you see a clear twitch in the contralateral hand. That's pretty much of the practical demonstration, but I will point out, I'm going to switch off the machine because it's whirring in my ear. There are lots of different ways of using TMS, and typically the way that repetitive pulse TMS is used is that first an area of the brain is localized, usually in an fMRI scanner. You then can co-register that area of the brain and the TMS machine, and you can use a navigated or guided system that will tell you exactly where it is you need to place the TMS coil. This allows you to stimulate regions of the brain that don't necessitate a behavioral output. So you can localize a region of the brain without having to see a movement necessarily. But the single pulse technique is a useful technique and a very straightforward technique because you see this behavioral response that allows you to localize the part of the brain, and you don't need an MRI scanner. Okay, I think that's it.